Hi. I think we should wave. Hi, Northside women.
I think we should wave.
This is a great plan. This is going great already. I feel
Yes.
great about this.
We decided
We're
to
starting.
record it.
Yes, it's happening.
Video record it, we should say.
This may or may not be a video that's released,
Yes.
but we are sitting here in the studio. We have mics in front of us, which is always true, and we have cameras in front of us. So I don't know if you're going to hear this
Yeah.
or see it and hear it.
Probably both.
Listen.
It's a new thing for us to be recording these.
Yes, it is.
With video.
It is.
So I'm used to looking at Amy. We're trying to decide if we're going to look at the cameras. We'll just, we're just going to do it.
I'm gonna look straight down the barrel sometimes.
Sometimes, yes.
When I think about it.
Okay.
But
Same.
this is what we look like, in case you didn't know that. Maybe.
I think this is a good addition.
You may. If you're listening to this on like your normal podcast thing, I think you'd probably find this on YouTube, like the church's YouTube channel, right?
Yes.
If you wanted to see the video instead.
Yes.
We're studying Esther today.
Yes.
Another
woman
of the Bible in our long series. We're kind of coming
we're
to
getting there.
Yeah. I think we're going to use this fall as a chance to like hit some of the really important
big names.
Yeah, women that we haven't studied yet, and then do some other things too.
Yeah. I'm excited.
With some interviews thrown in there.
Yeah. We kind of took this on not really realizing how long it would take us to do all the women of the Bible.
That is so true.
Yeah. But it's been really fun.
It is. And studying Esther, again, one of the few women in the Bible who have an entire chapter devoted to her.
Yeah. No.
Book of the Bible.
10 chapters.
10 chapters. Is it just her and Ruth?
Ooh.
I think it's just the two of them that have a book of the Bible.
Like an entire
named
book.
for them. So, and it's a long story. So we're just going to kind of jump into it and run through it.
Yeah.
So we're asking our questions as we always do. Who was she? What happened? How did God use her? And how is her story relevant to us today? So if I'm being honest, there's just a lot of the story, and I'm just going to kind of like barrel through it. Is that okay with you? Because it's
10 chapters. I mean,
it's a lot of information.
Yeah.
I really encourage you to read Esther. One thing I found really interesting about reading it is that God is not mentioned by name anywhere in this book.
Yes, that's true.
So we'll get to that.
But he was definitely a part of it.
Oh, definitely.
Yeah.
But I feel like very few books of the Bible is that true.
Yeah.
So Esther, she was born with the name Hadassah, which is a Hebrew name that means myrtle tree. And the significance of the myrtle tree is that it symbolizes peace and love and prosperity. So as we see more about Esther in this story, she's very much like willing to be kind of a background character until someone encourages her to really be brave and step forward in a big way. And she does.
And she does it, yeah.
But I think that's one of the things that was very attractive, a quality about her, that she was quiet and peaceful and beautiful, like just a lovely young woman.
Yeah.
So do you want to do this who was she part?
Yes.
It's really short. It's not all that exciting.
She was a Jewish woman.
Yes.
Living in Persia.
Yes.
During the Persian... Yeah.
In the Persian Empire. I knew what you meant.
I was trying to get there.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so her older cousin Mordecai had adopted her after both her parents passed away. So him and his wife raised her.
Yeah. And they say that they were cousins, but he was like much older, I guess. So
yeah, definitely more like a father, you can tell.
Yeah.
In their interaction. That's how she looked at him.
We don't know exactly when, like how old she was when her parents passed away and he like adopted her, but very much a father figure. And they're living in the Persian Empire, so we'll talk a little bit more about that. But they're probably a part of a group of Jewish people who are holdovers from having been
dispersed.
Yeah, and a lot of, after the exiled Jews were able to go back to their homelands, a lot of people had been there for many years, established a life for them, had jobs, part of the culture there. So there were probably some of those folks. So
and that's pretty common. You see that a lot with people
Yes.
who have been
exiled, and then
they establish a home there, and they're like, oh, you can come back. And
I mean, it sort of makes sense.
Yeah, I totally get it.
If I were living somewhere for decades, even
This
if it
is my
wasn't by
home
choice,
now.
you settle there,
Yeah.
really, whether it was by choice originally or not. So
so that's where she is.
So let's talk 4 main characters in this story. The King Xerxes, king of Persia. So he was ruling over 127 provinces in that area, a lot of dominion in that area. And then Esther, who we just talked about, Mordecai, her older cousin, who acted like a father figure to her. And he was also employed at the palace gate. So he had a job that was near the king's palace.
Right.
And then Haman.
Yes, or Haman.
Now you get to see the looks on our faces when we say them.
We love the names in these.
Do you want to use Haman? Is that better?
Oh, you know what? We're not going to probably get to her, but Bigtha is in this book, and I thought, wow, I can't believe I didn't know that name. As I was planning my children. Bigtha,
right?
She would have made it on the list.
Short list for a name. So. Haman, let's call him Haman.
Sorry, Haman, yeah.
So he ended up being a person who the king had promoted to basically his second in command. Turns out to be kind of a bad guy.
Yeah.
Let's be honest. He's kind of the villain of the story. So here's the backstory. And I'm going to go through this part really quickly. The king had a wife, King Vashti. And he already had a wife. And he was at his winter palace in Susa. And he was holding this big banquet with a bunch of his friends, and they were all drunk,
which was very common for this king.
Yeah, kind of. We'll see this as a theme. And he called his queen to him so that he could parade her in front of his friends, basically, and show how beautiful she was. And she refused to come, which was not okay. She was not allowed to refuse that. So he banished her. As his queen, he banished her out of the kingdom.
Yeah.
And then his advisors said, you know what, to make you feel better, why don't we look for a new little young queen? A fun, pretty queen.
Yeah.
He was like, sounds great. So all of these women were brought into the palace, Esther among them.
Yes.
And for 1 year, they were...
This whole part, the whole thing.
For 1 year, they were given beauty treatments before they were presented to the king.
Can't be presented unless... You've been beautified for a year.
So, Mordecai said to Esther, I think that you should, enter the Miss America pageant, and I think that you should keep the fact that you are of Jewish heritage a secret. I don't think that you should spread that around. So she did. And we don't know exactly why he said that, but she just followed his advice. And he would check on her because he was working at the gate, all of that.
Well, they're a minority.
Yes.
And I think that's just, unfortunately, a pretty common thing among
it's a
minorities.
Good way to say it.
You're not going to parade the fact that you are
that may be something that you keep to yourself. So she did that. And, okay, so here's a little side story that will become important. One day while Mordecai is doing his route, whatever it is, at the gate, he overhears these 2 eunuchs planning to assassinate the king. And I think he tells someone, it says, I wrote this in my notes. I could read them.
Yes, Mordecai, we're used to having notes, so y'all just bear with us.
We're used to it, yeah. So he passed the information on to Esther, and then she told the king through whatever means she needed to. Yeah. And the plot was foiled, and the king's life was spared. So that will become important later on. But Mordecai realized, these 2 men are trying to plot to assassinate the king, and it was pretty common for that to be a thing, and someone to try to take power essentially in that way. Yeah. And so that didn't end up happening because Mordecai said something. He heard something and he said something. So enter our bad guy, Haman. Again, the king a little while later promoted this guy over all the other nobles, making him the most powerful official in the empire. This is in Esther 3. And he commanded that everyone should bow down to him, show him the respect he deserved, etc. And so people did that. When Haman would pass by, people would bow down to him. except for Mordecai.
Yeah. And
Mordecai. There's a couple of reasons this is probably true, but their ancient ancestors were like these fierce enemies. So that might have been part of it. And then just Mordecai, in all likelihood, refused to bow down to him because he would only bow to his God.
Yeah.
And again, it doesn't say God's name in the book of Esther.
Right.
But we're coming to that.
Yeah.
So this was not acceptable to bad guy Haman. He was furious and wounded pride, all the ego, all the power that he wanted. And so he started plotting with his family, and I think it was his wife that was like, why don't you have this guy killed?
Yeah, it was his wife. Of course.
Come on, ma'am. Do not act that way. So, yeah. So, one of the things she said was, why don't you have him killed? And basically it turned into, why don't we have all the Jewish people in Persia killed?
Yeah.
And so he went to the king and said, hey, there's this group. I don't think he said the Jews, but he said like, there's this group of people that are here and they're kind of like infiltrated among all of our provinces and they're no good and we should just get rid of them. Like, there's a race of people. They're a problem.
Yeah.
We should get rid of all of them.
What is the deal with that? We see that throughout so much of our history.
I mean, that's so true, isn't it?
Anyways.
It's not hard to believe that this really happened, is it? No. Like that this is a real story.
Yeah, no.
So the king agreed and a decree was sent out to all 127 provinces. And essentially it gave people a year. And then I think it was like March 7th of the next year that they could kill all the Jewish people, men, women, children, and plunder their homes. Like, I'm trying to imagine being a Jewish person living there for that year. Do you try to leave? I don't know.
Yeah.
But one thing to consider too in this time was that if a king issued a decree, it could never be undone, even by the king. Right. It had to continue to stand. So sort of Haman tricked the king. The king wasn't really paying attention, let's be honest.
Yeah.
So Mordecai learned of this. He asked Esther, this is like partway through, we're going to read in Esther 4 here in just a moment.
Yep.
He asked Esther to go beg the king for mercy and plead on behalf of her people. So let's read, will you read Esther 4, 10 through 17?
Yes. Okay. It says, then Esther spoke to Hathach.
So sorry.
Hathach, and commanded him to go to Mordecai and say, all the king's servants and the people of the king's provinces know that if any man or woman goes to the king inside the inner court without being called, there is but one law, to be put to death, except the one to whom the king holds out the golden scepter so that he may live. But as for me, I have not been called to come into the king these 30 days.
Yeah.
17? Is that what you said?
17,
yeah, okay. And they told Mordecai what Esther had said. Then Mordecai told them to reply to Esther, do not think to yourself that in the king's palace you will escape any more than all the other Jews. For if you keep silent at this time, relief and deliverance will rise for the Jews from another place. But you and your father's house will perish. And who knows whether you have not come to the kingdom for such a time as this. Then Esther told them to reply to Mordecai, go gather all the Jews to be found in Susa and hold a fast on my behalf, and do not eat or drink for 3 days, night or day. I and my young women will also fast as you do. Then I will go to the king, though it is against the law, and if I perish, I perish. Mordecai then went away and did everything as Esther had ordered him.
I mean.
Yeah, and that's like the famous verse.
Right. For such a time as this. And also, if I die, I die.
Yeah.
I mean, I feel like I thought that was probably in a movie somewhere, but Esther said it. So let's break this down for a second. Basically, they're sending messengers back and forth between Mordecai and Esther. Whoever that person's name was, they're the messenger, taking these messages back and forth. And Mordecai says, don't think that just because you are queen that you'll be spared from this decree, because a king's decree is binding.
Yeah.
And she said, the punishment for going into the king's court without him calling you is death. And if you go in and he holds his scepter out, then you're okay.
Yeah.
But if he doesn't, it's punishable by death.
Mm-hmm.
Not like maybe...
Yeah, death back then was just really like a thing that they just did. Like, well, we don't like this guy. Let's just kill him.
Banished. Like, that's one thing.
Yeah.
But it said that is the law.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so Mordecai pushed her and said, I really like what he said, which was, if you don't do this, God will provide another way. Mm-hmm. He will deliver his people. Mm-hmm. He didn't say God, but the Jews will receive deliverance one way or the other.
Yeah.
But you have been put in this position for such a time as this to deliver them. Mm-hmm. Do you want to be a part of God's work or not, is what he was trying not to say.
Yeah.
And Esther basically said, you have a point, and this is terrifying, but I guess I'll do it. And if I perish, I perish. Mm-hmm. Okay, so we're going to fast forward a little bit, go through some of these details pretty quick. Okay. So Esther goes to the king.
It's a long story.
It is very long.
I don't know if we reiterated
but some of the details are really important.
Yeah.
So Esther goes to the king, and she asks if he and Haman, bad guy Haman, would sit down and have a banquet with her. So they agree, and Haman's like, this is going great.
Yeah.
Things are great.
Haman's like, she invited me.
I feel great about this. Yeah. He is happy as a little lark.
Yes.
So, but he was still so annoyed by Mordecai. And so he went home that night, and his family said, why don't you plan to have Mordecai killed tomorrow? You can ask the king. Prepare this pole to impale him on, a 75-foot pole, because, why are we so obsessed with death? But here we are.
Yeah, exactly.
So he did that. He was like, okay, I'll prepare this impaling pole.
Let's prep it.
Yeah. I mean, why not, right?
Yeah.
So that night, this is one of my favorite parts of the story. The king had trouble sleeping, basically. So he asked that the book of the history of his reign be read to him. Read me a bedtime story. I can't sleep. So whoever
about me,
right? My good works in the kingdom.
Yeah.
It's classic king nonsense.
Yes, classic. Okay.
So while it was being read to him, the part that was being read to him was the account of how Mordecai had foiled this assassination plot from these two eunuchs back in the day.
Yeah.
And so the king said, oh my goodness, like basically I never realized that had happened.
Yeah.
Did anyone ever thank him or honor him or recognize him for saving my life? Mm-hmm. And they said, no, I don't think so. I just kept on doing his work at the gate. Yeah. Good old Mordecai. No big deal. So this is, again, such a good detail.
Yeah.
He says Haman was coming to ask the king about killing Mordecai. And the king says, hey, there's this guy. Doesn't use his name.
No name. Yeah.
There's this guy that did this great thing.
Story. Yeah.
And he saved me from assassination. What do you think that would be appropriate way to honor him? Mm-hmm. And so Haman's like, I don't know, put the king's robe on him and parade him around town.
He's like, someone that deserves more honor than me. That's something that he thought to himself.
Yeah.
And then he was like, well, let's just do it right then.
If we're going to do it, let's do it. Yeah. Do it up big time. He says, put the king's robe on him, get the king's horse, parade him around town so people can honor him. And I don't know what they do. Do they throw flowers? Do they clap? I'm not sure. It doesn't say. Mm-hmm. But he's like, let's make a big deal. It's like a whole thing, right? Yeah. Like a parade for this guy, this unnamed guy.
Yes.
And the king says, touche, I think we should do that.
Exactly as you just described it. Let's do it.
That's what I want. The king said, this is what I put in quotes as if this actually came from my Bible, which it didn't. Great, go get Mordecai the Jew and do all of that for him. And Haman's like, okay.
It's Mordecai. Yeah, of course it's Mordecai.
So he did. He did what he did what he was told, and he went home that night feeling dejected and totally humiliated. Yeah. Deflated. Understandable. The man he was planning to kill, and he would feel so good about killing, just got all this honor and praise and glory.
Yeah.
Bummer. Mm-hmm. We've all been there, right? Mm-hmm. Okay. So, moving along.
Yeah.
So the king and Haman go to Esther's banquet that she'd invited them to. And the king asked Esther, he'd been asking her after she approached him, what can I give you that would make you happy? What can I do for you? What do you want? I'll give you anything. Mm-hmm. Anything to please you, basically. You're my queen. And so she told him about her people and about Haman's plot to kill all of them. It autocorrected to Herman. Not as scary. And so the king ended up impaling Haman on the pole that he had prepared to kill Mordecai with.
Yeah, plot twist, man.
I mean.
Yeah.
The full circle.
He prepared his own death.
He did. His death instrument. Who knew? Not him, obviously. Or I bet his wife felt pretty bad.
Yeah.
And I don't mean to make light of it, because obviously this is a real person who really died a painful death.
Yeah.
But like, yes, plot twist. I mean, this would make a fantastic like soap opera.
Oh, it totally would.
Like,
I've thought the same thing.
The evil twin.
Yeah.
Impaling pole. Mm-hmm. Okay. So that same day, the king, since he couldn't undo his previous decree, he issued a new decree. And so it basically said that the Jewish people on that same day, March 7th, had a right to, quote, unite to defend their lives, and said that they were allowed to kill, slaughter, and annihilate anyone of any nationality or province who might attack them or their children and wives, and to take the property of their... Basically, you can protect yourselves by whatever means necessary when the time comes. This is in Esther 8. Then, again, we're just rolling through this. It's a lot of information. Yeah. Mordecai was given Haman's position, essentially, promoted to this position of great authority. He had authority, basically second-hand man to the king and queen. So come March 7th of the next year, the day of doom, essentially, I think there were probably a lot of non-Jewish people who were like, I'm not even going there.
Yeah.
The Bible describes it as kind of intense. Like, some people are just like, I'm not doing this because they have a right to fight back. Some people did it anyway. And many people, the Jews were completely victorious over their enemies. I don't think any Jewish people perished, but many non-Jewish people who tried to attack them did perish.
Yeah.
So...
It reminds me of that movie, The Purge. Like, do you know what I'm talking about? Where it's like I haven't seen it either. I just know the concept of it. Okay. And I've always thought it's weird. Like, why would you want to do these things?
Right.
Like, for one day, there's no laws and you can just do whatever you want.
A lawless
It's kind of, I felt that way about this. Yeah. I'm like, just leave them alone. What does it matter?
Just
why would
don't
you kill
do
them?
it.
Yeah. Yeah. But people did, and people
are crazy. Some of it, I wonder if some of it was like you said, people being like racist. And then I think there were probably people that were like, if I kill my neighbor, I can take their stuff.
Oh, true. Yeah.
And it's lawful to do it.
Yeah. Yeah, it still just is like...
wild.
Yeah, wild.
So anyway, they were... the Jews overpowered their enemies, and this went on for a few days. And each time the king would put in a new decree in place that allowed the Jews to defend themselves. So after all this is over... March 7th, March 8th, March 9th comes and goes. And Mordecai recorded all these events, and and then he called on the Jewish people to celebrate an annual festival on those 2 days, March 7th and 8th. And it's still in March to this day, but not those same dates. But to remember what God had done for them, giving them relief from their enemies. Yeah. So the festival of Purim is still a festival that Jewish people celebrate today. For this reason, and they were so good at that. Like, Lady B was talking this morning in Bible study about how it was like a lot of this oral tradition passed down, and that's part of the reason they did festivals, was because they didn't have like this Bible right in front of them with all the information.
Right.
And so it was like to help them remember. But I just love that they still celebrate those things, and like there's so much about the culture that is about remembering what God has done for them.
Yep.
So that's
the story. We're not quite as good as that.
We're not.
But yeah.
That's the wild, crazy, twisty-turny. And I mean...
I think you did a great job explaining it.
I was reading it and I was like, oh, I could skip over that part. No.
Yeah.
No.
I know.
There's so many little... And we're going to come to that. But let's talk about how God used her. So...
Yeah.
Again, this was the part we were talking about earlier, that a note about the book of Esther, that God is never mentioned even once. But like you said, he's clearly present in what happened. God used Esther to save his chosen people from complete annihilation in those 127 provinces.
Yeah.
So I read one note that said this, quote, The Jews were unique in being the people of one God. This is my words now, as opposed to many pagan gods that the people of the time worshipped. A story about them was naturally a story about God, for even the name Jew carried with it the connotation of one who worshipped Yahweh.
Yeah, that's very true.
You didn't have to see the name G-O-D, God, in your Bible in Esther to know that they worshiped the one true God.
Yeah, Yahweh.
They were known by it.
Yeah.
They were his chosen people.
Which probably does explain some of the fear people had.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, they knew that. That was a known thing about them.
Right.
And how Yahweh does always deliver his people. So there is probably that desire of like, we just need to get rid of these people.
A very powerful God.
Yeah.
Like, and in most people's minds, one of many.
Yeah.
But the one true Yahweh had come through for his people time and time again. So I agree. I think people were like, we don't want them to be we want to be done with them because it's too much. We want to worship all our gods. We want to do all our things. So,
yeah.
But God used Esther to save his people at that time. He placed her in a position, which we talk about positionality a lot in this podcast.
Yeah.
Many episodes, to be the king's beloved queen. And he, King Xerxes didn't know that Esther was Jewish. I don't know if he would have cared or not, but she happened to keep that information back, but he still chose her among many, many women to be his new queen. And when the time came, she was in a position that she could have some power, like do something. And God's timing was perfect. Mordecai said to Esther, "Hey, I think you need to intervene here." And she was like, "I don't think so." No, thank you.
Yeah.
Kind of like Moses, like,
I'm going to get killed.
Yeah.
That's what she was thinking.
So good. I don't think that's a good idea. And of course, I mean, that's terrifying, but to have her in a position of authority like that for such a time as this, that's God's perfect timing. It's hard to ignore. And she could have chosen, as many, of these stories of women in the Bible, she could have chosen differently. She could have said, I'm not going to be God's mouthpiece. I'm not going to be used in this way. And Mordecai even said, our people will be delivered one way or the other because I trust that God will do that. But here's an opportunity for you to get involved in God's work in a huge historical, a groundbreaking way. And she chose to. So.
Yeah, these women of the Bible.
They're no joke.
Yeah.
We better get out there and use our bravery, I think.
I think so, too. And our voices. I mean, we have a place.
We do. And I don't think there's a single thing that I could say in modern times in our world that I would fear the punishment of death by.
No.
Like lawfully.
Yeah, no.
So I'm not sure what my excuse is. And then another thing I noted is that it might seem coincidental that the kings, I still call it the bedtime story, happened to be the account of Mordecai foiling that assassination plot.
Yeah, that was totally.
But God was totally at work in that as well. So, I mean, he used many people in this story, but he used Esther to save the Jews from complete destruction I'm trying to imagine the amount of, like, the known world at the time that 127 provinces was. It's a big amount of kingdom.
Yes.
It's a lot of
empire.
Jews.
It's an empire.
Yeah. So all of those Jews would have been, those just people living their lives, feeding their families, doing their work, raising their children, tending their land, would have been killed for no reason, basically.
Yeah.
What do you think?
Yeah.
Do you have thoughts? Because we're about to get to what can we
thoughts.
learn from her, what's relevant to us, that kind of stuff.
Yeah. As far as how God used her, I mean, it's obvious how God used her. Apparent. I think I just maybe thought, like, it was really unfortunate what she had to go through to get there. You know, like, I don't know. I just really thought about, because she started out like, you're going to go to this household where the virgins are. And then something between the king and her happened.
Right.
And he gets to decide whether or not that's good enough.
Right.
But she gets moved now to this other house where all the, I think, what do they call them, concubines, I'm just like, this
She's
poor,
very
the
much
way they were
treated as an
treating
object.
them. Yes, I just like that really hurt me. But then to see, like, man, look at how God used that unfortunate, like, this is how this was playing out in her life.
Yeah.
And just in women's lives in that day. Like, that was just kind of, how like, even the men, when Vashti, however you say her name, did what she did, they were like, oh, we can't have this because then all of our wives are going to do it because the queen did it. Like, just such fear, just led by such fear.
Right.
Yeah.
Yes, they were like, oh, if the queen can disrespect her husband like that, we need to make sure that none of our wives can disrespect us.
Yeah.
Very prideful.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just like, I think sometimes when we look back at these stories, like, we can read them and see that it wasn't a great time for them.
Right.
But, like, we are looking at it through the lens of the time and age that we live in.
Right.
And, like, if someone were to say that to me, Libby, like, maybe you were here for such a time as this, I'm like, okay, I just need to buck up and do it. Like, but that literally took so much effort from her. Like, it had to. Like, she had to have just been so terrified, like, truly
she gave
terrified.
her whole life in more ways than one, didn't she?
Exactly.
And I get that
and, like, what was her life that she was even living at that point?
Right.
Like,
she gave that up entirely. And I get, like, I was joking to Libby earlier, I think I would make a great queen.
Yeah.
I think I'd be great at that job.
Yeah.
But she didn't know when she gave all of that up and moved into the palace and did a year of beauty treatments and slept with the king that she didn't know there was a stranger and got moved in.
Just as an option.
Right.
Like, he might choose you.
Yes. She didn't know the end of the story, even of her being chosen to be queen. Mm-hmm. But even so, she was still, I mean, for her to be queen of 127 provinces and not be able to approach the king without fear of death.
Right.
I don't think that was a position of a lot of power.
No.
It was like
a
token position.
Yeah. And they picked the most beautiful one, the one that pleased him. Like, it had nothing to do with her, really.
Right. Or like probably a genuine relationship.
Right.
But
no.
And, you know, she did what she could do with what she had, but when that would have been terrifying to be moved into the palace and, like, what happens to all of those that weren't her? Mm-hmm. She could have been one of those, like...
Now they're just defiled and no one else wants them.
Right.
Yeah. It's just like, I don't know, just like the weight of it. Like, really, it is like it's a good story. It would be a great soap opera, but, like, that's like real life for them.
It is.
And the fact that she did what she needed to do.
Right.
It's really remarkable.
Right.
I mean, like, that's like, wow, yeah, Esther, like, good.
She's it makes a good me one think to of like a hardy, you know, like I feel like they were built of hardy stock. They had to be. We were walking miles in the dirt to draw water from the well, and that was just one thing of a million, and expectations. Like, so I totally agree with you. It's hard to imagine doing what she did, like, in our time, but there were so many things that held them. You kind of alluded to that in your teaching in Acts 2. Like, there were so many things that they had to contend with that we don't have to. Right. So us acknowledging that, yes, I do think that's very relevant. So let's talk about what can we learn from her. How is her story relevant to us today?
Go ahead. Yeah,
here's a few things. And, you know, it's been a little, I can get a little preachy, but.
Yeah, we've probably already started that process.
Yeah.
That's fine.
Her story shows us that God is deeply involved in the details of human life.
Yeah.
So actually, as we get to this, we're near the end here, and I'm going to ask you, I have 2 points here, and for each of them, I have a question that you as a listener and us, I want us to think about this in our lives, like an application question.
Okay.
So if you're listening, now is a good time to get like a piece of paper out. So,
or mental notes. At least. Yeah.
So let's talk about the details of this story. Any small change in this recorded story would have produced a greatly different outcome. God put Mordecai in a position to know that the king was seeking a new queen. He put Mordecai in a position to be raising Esther and his family, for that matter. Mm-hmm. He placed Esther in a position to be a favored contender, like you said, out of all of these women, and eventually queen among what must have been, I would assume, at least hundreds, maybe thousands. They called women from all 127 provinces, probably many, many, many from each.
Yeah.
So God gave Mordecai the fortitude to foil that assassination plot against the king and go on. And he just did the duties of his job. He didn't ask for anything in return. He didn't ask for a parade with a horse.
Right.
He just went, this is the right thing to do. And he did it. And he went on with his life.
Yeah.
And then God gave Mordecai a strong heart for just only bowing to the one true God. Very similar to what we see in the book of Daniel. And that's what angered the villain in this story. And then God orchestrated each and every detail to provide deliverance to his chosen people. And not just deliverance, but he elevated Esther and Mordecai and all of the Jewish people in that kingdom.
Right.
As a result of this.
Right.
So,
yes.
Here's my question for us. And me and Libby are not going to answer this question out loud. If we believe that the Bible is true, which I hope we do.
Yeah, we do.
Then can we believe that God is about his work in the details of our lives too? What detail do you find yourself believing that God has forgotten about in your life or overlooked in your current situation? We can't believe both things.
Yeah.
We can't believe that God is about the details in the lives of people, but that he's not about them for us. Where are we missing that in our lives?
Yeah.
This was a hard one for me. The other thing we can learn, and that's relevant to us today, is that Esther made many choices in this series of events, which this is almost always a theme as we study women of the Bible. They could have chosen something different, but instead they got to be a part of God's work because they chose to follow his will.
Right.
So God chose to use her to deliver his people. He would have done that with or without Esther because it was his will. Mordecai said that.
Right.
But Esther showed loyalty to Mordecai and to her Yahweh. She showed courage and bravery to enter the king's court, begin a relationship with him, be named queen, and quietly bide her time until she heroically chose to go to the king, knowing she could be put to death. I don't really feel like there's a strong enough way to say that for doing so.
Yeah. No, there's not.
She knew that Queen Vashti had been banished from the kingdom simply because she refused a simple order from the king.
Right.
So Esther said, if I must die, I must die, and chose to trust God's providence.
Right.
So here's the part where I want us to think. Sit with God. Ask him to bring to mind some for just such a time as this moments from your life. Sift through the details. Was God at work in them? Can you we've been talking about the Holy Spirit in Acts. Where have you seen him working?
Yeah.
If he was at work in Esther's details and Mordecai's and Haman's, Haman, whoever's details, can we trust him to be about his work in the details of our lives? And is there something that's happening in your life now that you haven't trusted God with the timing of? Because there's a lot of things that I think should just be a certain way in a certain time, and always that way in that time are mine.
Right. Yeah.
Even the pride of saying, I think I would make a good queen shows that. So are there some places where we can surrender the timing and the outcome and the details, knowing that God, if we look back at the beginning of Esther's story, like you said, I don't think anyone would have looked at her and known. They couldn't have guessed that in a million guesses, in a million soap opera storylines, that's how it would play out. But God did. He knew.
Yeah, he had a plan.
He did. And he was going to fulfill it with or without Esther, honestly.
Yeah.
Again, he chooses to let us be part of that. So, anyway.
Yeah, I like it.
Esther.
Yeah.
Man.
One just little thought that I want to add is that God does, we see time and time again that he is a redeemer of his people.
Yes.
And just like you were saying, he chooses to allow us to be a part of that process. Now, especially post-Jesus, now we have the Holy Spirit. We've been commissioned to go and make disciples of all nations. So one just thought, like Esther did what she needed to do to be a part of the plan that God had.
Right.
in place to redeem his people. And they believed and knew that that was the plan, and he was going to do it no matter what. So my thought and challenge is, it's very similar to yours, but like, are you taking that seriously? Like, you have been put here for such a time as this. Right. You know this story. Do you believe it enough to be a part of it? Yeah. Like, truly, he has plans to use every single one of us.
Right.
And to redeem his people. Like, are we going to take that seriously?
Even if we're not queen? Yeah, even if
I'm not the queen. Yeah.
Whether that's literally or figuratively. Mm-hmm. Well, and one thing that's just come to mind, too, is, that concept of the Jews being known by Yahweh.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
If I walk around in my life and I don't wear the T-shirt that says I've just been at church.
Right. That says Yahweh.
Do people still know that do they know me by my name? Amy is a Yahweh follower. Mm-hmm. Jewish people are followers of Yahweh. They're his chosen people.
Right.
They were known for that.
Yeah.
They didn't have to say the word God, Yahweh, in this book for us to know that it belongs in the canon of the Bible.
Right. Right. And even like another thought just to tack on to that, like, now that was Old Testament.
Yeah.
Which we know that God is the same.
Yeah.
But then post Jesus, they were literally called Christians because they acted like Christ.
Right.
So that word Christian means little Christ. Like, they're acting just like this guy.
Yeah.
So they were known by that. Like, they were known by the way that they acted and the fact that they acted like Christ. Yeah. And maybe just another question for all of us to think about, not to answer, but what do people think of Christians today?
Right.
Is it a positive thing or a negative thing? And
how can we be part of that? How can we impact that in a positive way?
Right.
If someone knows that I'm a believer, is it because, and I know we talk a lot about like, our actions versus our words, having to say it, Okay, both. It needs to be both. Mm-hmm. Let's be honest. Our actions and our words need to show the world that we look like Christ.
Absolutely.
Not to be perfect, but we need to use both. Mm-hmm. But it makes me wonder, like, there's a funeral for an incredibly sweet saint this morning here at the church. Mm-hmm. What was she known for? Mm-hmm. Her faith.
Yeah. Yeah.
What will I be known for?
Right.
If today is it, what have I left behind?
Right.
That's important. And how do people know that besides just me using my words, besides my actions, besides my character? How are all those things coming together in my life, or are they to point to Christ?
Right.
Because if we're not doing that, we're not living our life. I mean, Esther basically gave up I don't know what she was planning to do with her life. Mm-hmm. Every dream she might have had for herself as an adult, she gave that up entirely. Now, granted, God used her in a mighty way, and I hope she continued to live a long and prosperous life as a queen who was loved by her husband and by the people of that empire. But, man.
Yeah. And they recognize their God as Yahweh, right? The one true God. That's the God that they worship.
Yeah.
A very powerful God.
Yeah.
What did people recognize our God as?
Right.
Yeah.
Esther.
Oh, Miss Esther. Poor thing.
Let's look at all the cameras now. Yes. Here we go.
I don't even know if I looked at it once, Amy. I was enthralled, and your telling of this story, you did a great job.
What I think I'm going to hate about this episode, if it does air with video, is that I only looked at the camera in like shock. Like, I think I'm going to be like, oh, that was a thing. Okay.
We'll get better at this.
Yeah, it'll get a little more natural, hopefully.
Hopefully.
Okay. Well, thank you for joining us for Esther, and we'll see you next time.
See you next time.